The old man walked his cracked land every morning while the whole village laughed at him behind their curtains. What none of them knew was that in 6 weeks, government surveyors would arrive at his gate with a briefcase, and everything the village had mocked would suddenly matter more than any of them could imagine. Robert Hensley was 73 years old that summer, thin as a fence post, with hands the color of old leather from 6 decades of working land that most people said was worth nothing at all. His farm sat at the edge of Millbrook, 12 acres of dry soil, cracked in the summers, hard as stone in the winters. Nothing much grew there. Nothing much ever had. His father had left it to him 30 years ago, along with a single instruction, spoken from a hospital bed with a voice already fading. "Watch the water, son. Just watch the water." Robert had watched. For 30 years he had watched. The morning the developer's black car pulled into Millbrook, Robert was standing at the north corner of his property, holding a small green notebook and a measuring tape older than his grandson. He wrote something down. He looked at the sky. He wrote something else. From the road, his neighbor Ellis Watson saw him and shook his head the way people do when they think a man is finally slipping. The car belonged to a man named Scott Devlin. He wore a suit that did not belong in a place like Millbrook, and he spoke with the smooth confidence of someone who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. Within a week, he had visited every household in the village. Within 2 weeks, he had bought most of them. His plan was simple, he said, sitting in living rooms with folders of glossy paper. A resort. Cabins, a lake feature. A restaurant that would draw people from 3 states over. Jobs, growth, a future. The village had never heard the word future said out loud like that. It sounded like music. One by one, the family signed. Old man Colby, who had grumbled about property taxes for 20 years, took the money and moved his wife to a warmer town. The Prescott family, who had run the feed store since anyone could remember, sold their acres and closed the shop. Even the church board began to whisper about relocating. By the end of the month, 41 of the 42 properties in Millbrook had been signed, sealed, and celebrated. Only one remained. Scott Devlin came to Robert's front porch on a Thursday afternoon with a folder under his arm and a smile he had practiced in the mirror. Robert was sitting in a rocking chair his father had built with his own hands. He did not rise. He did not offer coffee. He listened without interrupting while Scott laid out his opening offer. $80,000 for 12 acres of what Scott politely called underutilized land. Robert looked at the folder for a long moment. Then he looked at Scott. "No, thank you," he said. Scott laughed the way city men laugh when they have not yet realized the answer is real. He raised his offer to $120,000. Robert did not move. He raised it again. $150. $200. $250. Robert kept his eyes on the horizon where a heat shimmer rose from his cracked field, saying nothing. "It isn't the number," Robert said finally. Scott's smile thinned. "Everyone has a number, Mr. Hensley." "No, sir," Robert said quietly. "That's a thing people say when they've never had to keep something that mattered." The developer left angry that afternoon. The village learned about it by supper time. And by the time the sun rose the next morning, the whispers had already begun. Stubborn old man. Selfish fool. Standing in the way of everything the rest of them had waited their whole lives for. They did not know yet that Robert had spent 30 years learning something none of them had ever bothered to look at. They did not know about the notebook. They did not know about the measuring tape. They did not know what his father had told him on that hospital bed all those years ago. They only knew that the future had arrived in a black car, and one old man was standing in the way. The pressure began quietly, the way pressure always does in small towns. A polite refusal to sit next to Robert at the diner. A cold nod from a woman who had brought him soup when his wife died 6 years back. The mailman, who had waved every morning for a decade, suddenly finding reasons to look somewhere else. Robert noticed all of it. He wrote none of it down. His notebook was for other things. By the second week, the coldness had grown teeth. Scott Devlin, working through channels that did not appear on any contract, made sure of it. He hosted a barbecue for the villagers at the old fairground, catered by a company nobody in Millbrook had ever heard of. He gave a speech about progress and about how one man's refusal was costing every family in the room real money, real jobs, real futures for their children. He did not mention Robert by name. He did not have to. By the end of the week, the road that ran along the eastern edge of Robert's property had been blocked with a gravel berm. The county said it was for construction staging. Robert now had to drive nearly 6 miles out of his way to reach the highway. When he asked the county office about it, the woman behind the desk looked at her computer for a long time and then told him she was very sorry, but the permit had been filed correctly and there was nothing to be done. Robert drove home the long way. He did not complain. He walked his north fence at sunset with his notebook, wrote down the color of the sky and the direction of the wind, and went inside to fix himself a supper of beans and cornbread. The water came next. Millbrook had shared a well system for as long as anyone could remember, a cooperative arrangement that piped groundwater from a communal source to every property in the village. 2 weeks after the road was blocked, Robert turned on his kitchen tap and heard nothing but a hiss of air. He walked out to the pump house at the edge of the co-op grounds and found a new padlock on the gate and a notice tacked to the wood. Membership under review. Contact board for details. The board consisted of 3 men who had all signed Scott Devlin's contract the previous month. Robert did not bother to contact them. He walked back to his house, unpacked the old hand pump his father had used during the drought of '68, and by nightfall, he had drawn his first bucket from the small spring at the back of his property. It ran clean. It ran cold. It had never once, in 73 years, gone dry. He wrote that down in the notebook too. His grandson Tyler drove up from the city that Saturday. Tyler was 26, worked at a marketing firm downtown, and loved his grandfather with a fierce and slightly exasperated love that had grown more exasperated in recent months. He parked his car in the dirt drive and walked up onto the porch and stood there with his hands in his pockets for a long moment before he spoke. "Grandpa," he said, "I heard about the water." Robert nodded. He was rocking in the chair his father had built. He gestured at the other chair. Tyler sat. He was quiet for a while, then he said the thing he had driven 3 hours to say. "Grandpa, please just sell it." Robert did not answer immediately. He looked out at the fields at the way the evening light lay long and yellow across the cracked earth. Somewhere in the distance a bird was calling. "They're making your life miserable," Tyler said. "For what? For dirt?" "Grandpa, it's just dirt. $250,000. You could buy a nice place near me. You could travel. You could rest. You've earned rest." "I have rested," Robert said quietly. "I've rested here. They cut your water off. I have water. They blocked your road. I have another road." Tyler leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and his voice broke a little around the edges. "Grandpa, everyone in that village hates you right now. Everyone, and you're sitting here like it's a normal Tuesday. Why? What is it? What am I missing?" Robert looked at him for a long time. His weathered face softened, but he did not answer the question. Instead, he reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out the small green notebook and set it on the little table between them. "When I'm gone," he said, "you read this. Not before." Tyler stared at the notebook. He did not touch it. "Grandpa, that's not an answer." "No," Robert agreed. "It isn't." Tyler stayed the night. He slept in the small back bedroom where he had slept as a boy, the one with the quilt his grandmother had stitched by hand and the water stain on the ceiling shaped like a crooked star. He did not sleep well. He lay in the dark listening to the creak of the house settling around him, thinking about the notebook, thinking about the old man in the next room, thinking about how the whole world seemed to be pushing in one direction while his grandfather stood alone in the other. At dawn, before the sun had cleared the ridge, Tyler heard the screen door open. He got up and looked out the window. Robert was already walking the fence line, notebook in one hand, measuring tape in the other. The mist still clung to the low places, and the old man moved through it slowly, stopping at points he seemed to know by heart, kneeling to press his palm flat against the earth in places where nothing looked any different from any other place. Tyler watched him for a long time. He did not understand what he was seeing, but something in the way his grandfather moved, deliberate, patient, unhurried as a man reading a book he had already read 100 times, made the exasperation in Tyler's chest soften into something quieter, something closer to fear. He drove back to the city that afternoon without asking the question again. The next month was hard. Scott Devlin had lost his patience, and when men like Scott Devlin lose their patience, they stop pretending to be reasonable. The county reassessed Robert's property taxes and mailed him a bill 3 times what he had paid the year before. A code enforcement officer showed up on a Tuesday and cited him for an unpermitted structure, which turned out to be the same tool shed that had stood in the same place since Robert's father built it in 1952. A letter arrived from a lawyer Robert had never heard of, claiming an old easement dispute over the western boundary. Robert answered each of them the same way. He paid the tax bill from the coffee can where he kept his savings. He wrote a polite letter to the code officer explaining the shed's history and attached a photograph of the property from 1961. He filed the lawyer's letter in a drawer and did not respond. At the diner in the next town over, where he now took his Sunday breakfast because no one in Millbrook would seat him, the waitress asked him once how he was holding up. Robert smiled at her, tired but real, and said he was holding up just fine. "They say you're crazy," the waitress said. She was maybe 40, with kind eyes. "The folks from Millbrook. They come in here and talk about you. They say you've lost your mind." "I know," Robert said. "Have you?" Robert took a slow sip of his coffee. Then he said, "My daddy taught me to watch the water, ma'am. That's all I've been doing. If watching the water is crazy, then yes, I suppose I have." The waitress did not understand, but she refilled his coffee for free. The village, meanwhile, had settled into a strange rhythm. Most of the families had already taken Scott Devlin's money and were living out their last weeks in houses that were no longer really theirs. Some had already moved. The Prescotts were gone. The Colbys were gone. The little church at the crossroads had held its final service and now stood empty, the doors chained, a for sale sign leaning against the front steps. Millbrook was dying, and everyone in it seemed to be waiting for something, though none of them could have said quite what. They were waiting for Robert to break. It became a kind of unspoken sport. Bets were made in the back room of the last open store. How long could the old man hold out? A week, 2 weeks, a month. Ellis Watson, who had grown up 2 houses down from Robert, said he'd give it until the first hard rain, when the fields flooded and the old fool would have to come begging for a place to stay dry. But something strange happened when the first hard rain came, and it was Ellis Watson himself who noticed it, standing on his porch at 3 in the morning in his undershirt, watching the water rise around his own foundation, while, half a mile away, the lights in Robert Hensley's kitchen burned steady and dry. The storm came in from the west on a Tuesday night in early September, the kind of storm the old-timers still called a gully washer. It rained for 6 hours straight, not the gentle soaking rain that fed the pastures, but the hard, driving rain that came down in sheets and pounded the roofs and turned every ditch into a small brown river. Lightning cracked over the ridge. Thunder rolled through the valley in long, slow waves. By midnight, half the village had water in its yards. Ellis Watson had lived in his house for 51 years. He knew where the water always pooled, knew which corner of the basement would leak first, knew the exact sound the sump pump made when it began to strain. That night, standing on his back porch with a flashlight, he watched the water climb up over his lower step and knew he was in for a long few days. The Prescott place, already empty, had brown water lapping at the porch. The old church at the crossroads had a small lake around its foundation, down at the co-op pump house. The ground was so saturated that footprints filled with water the moment a boot lifted away. And half a mile east, on the 12 acres everyone had called worthless, Robert Hensley's fields were already draining. Ellis did not notice this at first. He was too busy dealing with his own basement. But sometime around 3 in the morning, he stepped out onto his porch again to look at the sky and saw, in the distance, the warm yellow square of Robert's kitchen window. The old man was up. Of course he was up. And around that little house of his, the darkness had a different quality. It was not the shining wet black of standing water. It was the ordinary black of ground that had already let the rain go through. Ellis stared at it for a long time. He was tired and cold and half a bottle into a bad decision. But he was not a stupid man. He had lived on this land his whole life, and he knew, in some slow turning corner of his mind, that what he was looking at did not make sense. His yard was underwater. Robert's fields, lower by nearly 10 feet, were not. He shook his head. He went back inside. He did not think about it again until morning. But by morning, the whole village was thinking about it. The rain stopped just before dawn. When the sun came up, Millbrook looked like a place that had been through a small war. Down branches lay across the roads. The co-op pump house was standing in 6 inches of muddy runoff. Ellis's front pasture had become a shallow pond. The main road into the village was passable only in a truck with high clearance, and the county was not going to send anyone out for at least 2 days. But Robert Hensley's 12 acres were only wet, not flooded, not sodden, not standing in water. Wet, the way land is wet after a rain. By noon, they would be drying. By evening, they would be firm. Nobody said anything about it out loud. Not yet. But Ellis Watson, walking down to the co-op to see about the damage, took the long way around and passed by Robert's north fence, and he stood there for a full minute looking at those fields, with something moving behind his eyes that had not moved in a long time. Robert was out there too, of course. Notebook in hand, measuring tape in his pocket, walking the same slow paths he had walked 10,000 times before. He glanced up and saw Ellis standing at the fence, and he raised a hand in the small, polite wave of a man greeting a neighbor. Ellis did not wave back. He turned and walked on. That afternoon, Scott Devlin drove out to look at the storm damage on the properties he had purchased. He was in a foul mood. 2 of his lots had standing water. The old church had a leak in the roof he had not budgeted for. When he passed Robert's place, he barely glanced at it. He was thinking about drainage costs, about engineering surveys, about how much it was going to cost to make the ground stable enough to build a resort on. He did not yet understand that the answer to his drainage problem was standing right there behind a barbed wire fence, an old man with a green notebook walking in slow circles across land that did not flood. Not yet, but he would. The letter arrived on a Thursday. It came in an envelope with a state seal in the upper left corner, addressed to Mr. Robert J. Hensley in the crisp, impersonal typeface of a government office. The mailman, still unable to meet Robert's eye, left it wedged in the screen door and drove away without stopping. Robert took the letter inside and sat down at his kitchen table. He put on his reading glasses. He opened the envelope with a paring knife the way his wife had always taught him, sliding the blade along the top edge in one clean cut. He unfolded the single sheet of paper and read it slowly, twice. The letter was from the State Department of Water Resources. It informed him that his property had been identified as part of a preliminary study area for a regional water infrastructure project, and that a team of surveyors would be arriving on the 23rd of the month to conduct field assessments. His cooperation, the letter said politely, would be greatly appreciated. A representative would be in touch to schedule access. Robert read the letter a third time. Then he folded it carefully along its original creases, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it in the top drawer of the kitchen hutch, next to the coffee can where he kept his savings and the tin box where he kept his wife's wedding ring. He walked outside. He stood on his porch for a long time looking at the fields. Then, for the first time in 30 years, he smiled the small, tight smile of a man who has been proven right about something he was never going to explain. The surveyors arrived exactly when they said they would. 2 trucks, 5 people, orange vests and clipboards and equipment cases that looked like they cost more than Robert's house. They introduced themselves politely at the front gate. The lead surveyor was a woman named Dr. Halvorsen from the State Hydrology Division, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a practical knot and the kind of handshake that told you she had spent her life outdoors. She explained the project as they walked. The region had been struggling with water security for over a decade. Aquifer levels were dropping across 3 counties. The state had commissioned a study to identify recharge zones, the places where surface water actually made its way down through the soil to replenish the underground reserves. Most lands, she explained, did a poor job of it. The water pooled, evaporated, ran off. Only certain geological formations allowed for efficient recharge, and those formations were rare. "Mr. Hensley," she said, stopping at the north corner of his property, "when the aerial and geological surveys came back, your 12 acres lit up like a Christmas tree. Do you know what you're standing on?" Robert looked at her. His face gave away nothing. "I know," he said quietly. Dr. Halvorsen paused. She studied him for a moment with new attention. "You know," she repeated. "My father knew," Robert said. "He told me. He told me to watch the water. I've been watching it for 30 years. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out the small green notebook. It was worn soft at the corners, the cover creased and stained. He handed it to her. Dr. Halvorsen took it. She opened it. She read the first page. Then the second. Then she stopped and looked up at him with an expression he had not seen on another human face in a very long time. It was the expression of one person recognizing another for what they truly were. "Mr. Hensley," she said slowly, "these are drainage measurements. Rainfall totals. Percolation rates. Every storm for..." She flipped to the back of the notebook. "For 30 years. Yes, ma'am. Do you know what these are worth?" Robert almost laughed. It came out as a breath through his nose. "I know what they cost me," he said. "Every year, every storm, getting out in the mud and the wind and the cold. My wife used to say I was married to the land more than to her. She wasn't wrong." Dr. Halvorsen closed the notebook gently. She held it in both hands as if it were something fragile. "Sir," she said, "I need to make some phone calls, and I think you and I need to have a longer conversation. Because what you're holding here and what you're standing on is going to change a lot of things." Robert nodded slowly. He looked out at his cracked, dry, worthless fields. "I expect it will," he said. The phone calls Dr. Halvorsen made that afternoon set something in motion that could not be stopped. She stood at the edge of Robert's north field with her cell phone pressed to her ear, speaking to people in offices 200 miles away in language Robert did not entirely follow. Aquifer recharge coefficient, percolation rate, statutory easement, regional water authority, emergency designation. He caught the words, but not the weight of them. She spoke for nearly an hour. When she finally hung up, she walked back to where Robert was sitting on an overturned bucket and lowered herself down beside him with a small groan of tired knees. "Mr. Hensley," she said, "I want to explain something to you, and I want you to take your time understanding it." Robert nodded. "The state has been looking for a viable recharge site in this region for 6 years. 6 years. We've surveyed every county from here to the mountains. Nothing has come close to what your land can do." "Nothing," she paused. "Your father was right, and your notebook is going to save this region." Robert did not speak for a long moment. When he did, his voice was very quiet. He'd have liked to hear that. "There's more," she said. "The developer, Mr. Devlin, his resort project. I've had our legal team pull the permits this morning. His plans include water infrastructure that runs directly across the aquifer boundary. He cannot proceed without an easement across your property. Cannot politically, cannot legally. State code requires it. He probably doesn't even know yet." Robert looked at her. He looked at his fields. He looked at the sky. "He will soon," he said. Scott Devlin found out the next morning. Dr. Halvorsen's team had filed the preliminary designation with the county by close of business Friday, And by Monday morning, the paperwork had traveled through the channels it needed to travel through and landed on the desk of a state permit reviewer, who picked up the phone and called Scott Devlin's project office in the city. And by 10:32, Scott Devlin was in his car driving north with his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He arrived at Robert's gate a little after 1. He did not have his practiced smile this time. He did not have his folder of glossy paper. He got out of the car and walked up to the porch and stood there with his hands loose at his sides and a look in his eyes that Robert had seen before in other men who were used to winning and had just discovered that they were about to lose. "Mr. Hensley," Scott said. "Mr. Devlin, I'd like to talk." "Sit down," Robert said. He gestured at the other chair. He did not offer coffee this time either. Scott sat. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "How much?" Robert did not answer. "Whatever number you had in your head," Scott said. "Double it. Triple it. I'll pay it. Cash. This week. Whatever you want." Robert looked at him with something that was almost, but not quite, sympathy. "It was never a number, sir. I told you that the first day. You didn't believe me then. You don't believe me now. But it's still true. Everyone has a price." "No, sir," Robert said quietly. "That's what men like you tell yourselves so you can sleep at night. It's not true. It's just something you say." Scott's jaw worked. He looked out at the fields, at the same cracked ground he had dismissed 100 times, and Robert could see the calculations running behind his eyes. The slow, terrible arithmetic of a man realizing he had lost $20 million because he had not bothered to look at a hydrology map. "They'll take it," Scott said, and his voice had a small, ugly edge to it now. "The state. Eminent domain. They'll take it from you and pay you whatever they feel like paying. You know that, right?" Robert almost smiled. "They already offered," he said mildly. "Yesterday afternoon. Dr. Halverson called it a fair market appraisal, plus a hardship consideration. It was a great deal of money, Mr. Devlin, more than yours." Scott stared at him. And I said no. The silence that followed was the deepest Scott Devlin had heard in a long time. Scott Devlin found his voice slowly. "You said no to the state." "I did. To the state." "Yes, sir." Scott ran a hand down his face. He looked, for a moment, less like a developer and more like a man trying to solve a puzzle that had suddenly grown 3 extra sides. "Mr. Hensley," he said, "I don't understand you. I've been in this business 22 years. I have never in my life met a man who turned down a state buyout at hardship valuation. What is it you want?" Robert leaned back in his chair. The wood creaked under him. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that Scott began to wonder if the old man had simply drifted off. But then Robert spoke, and his voice was steady and slow and clear, the way a man speaks when he has thought about something for 30 years and finally has occasion to say it out loud. "My father bought this land in 1946, he said. Came home from the war with a limp and a small pension and put every dollar of it into 12 acres that everyone told him was worthless. He knew better. His granddaddy had walked this ground before him and told him what to look for. He passed that knowledge to me on his deathbed. Watch the water, he said. That was all. Watch the water. And I have, Mr. Devlin, every day. 30 years. Scott listened. He had the sense he was being told something important, though he did not yet know what. This land is not for sale, Robert said. It is not for sale to you, and it is not for sale to the state, and it will not be for sale to my grandson when I am gone. Because once a thing is sold, it belongs to whoever holds the paper. And whoever holds the paper decides what happens to it. My father did not spend his life keeping this ground so that someone else could decide what happens to it after he was gone. Then what do you want? Scott said again, but the edge had left his voice now. He was asking honestly. I want to lease it, Robert said, to the state. For 100 years. Renewable, the land stays in the family. The water flows to whoever needs it. That is the first thing. Scott waited. The second thing, Robert said, is that every household in Millbrook gets free water access from the new system. in perpetuity, written into the lease, not just the folks living there now, the folks who come after them too. This valley has been thirsty for a long time, Mr. Devlin. It will not be thirsty anymore. Scott's mouth opened slightly. He closed it. The third thing, Robert said, and now he looked at Scott directly, and there was nothing in his face that was cruel, but there was nothing in it that was going to bend either. Your resort. It gets built. I'm not standing in the way of it. But it funds the endowment. The endowment, Scott repeated carefully. A trust, Robert said. Managed by the county, overseen by the state, to maintain the recharge zone in perpetuity, to pay for the water system, to make sure that 50 years from now, when I am dust and you are dust, and everyone at this table is dust, the water still flows to every kitchen sink in this valley. The lease payments from the state go into the endowment. Your resort pays into it too. It's the cost of your easement. That's the deal. Scott stared at him. He was quiet for a very long time. You've thought about this, he said finally. For 30 years, sir, you knew this day was coming. I hoped it was. I didn't know. But my father hoped it. And his father before him. Somebody was going to figure out what this ground was worth eventually. I just wanted to make sure that when they did, the answer wasn't just money in one man's pocket. Scott sat back in his chair. He looked out at the fields. He looked at them, this time, the way Robert had been looking at them for 30 years. He did not entirely understand yet, but he was beginning to. Mr. Hensley, he said, I came here today to buy your land. I know, sir. I'm going to leave here today having lost about $8 million in projected revenue. I expect so. Scott almost laughed. It came out as a small breath. But I think, he said slowly, you might be the most honest man I have ever met. Word traveled through Millbrook the way word always travels in small places. Faster than any phone line, carried on the invisible current of curtains twitching and porch conversations and the particular silence that falls over a room when a rumor first enters it. By Wednesday evening, everyone in the village knew that state surveyors had spent 3 days on Robert Hensley's land. By Thursday, they knew Scott Devlin had driven up from the city and stayed for 2 hours. By Friday, the story had grown its own legs and was walking around town on its own, changing shape with every telling. He was going to be a millionaire, some said. He had struck oil, others said, though there was no oil within 400 miles. He had been sitting on a gold mine and had known it all along, and had let everyone treat him like a senile fool because he was too proud to explain himself. Ellis Watson, who had watched the water not rise around Robert's house during the storm, said nothing at all. He sat on his own porch in the evenings and looked toward the east, toward the 12 acres he had walked past 1,000 times in his life without ever really seeing, and he thought about a great many things. The first real crack in the village's wall came on a Saturday morning. Mrs. Colwell, who was 81 years old and had signed Scott Devlin's contract in the second week and had told her grandson at the time that Robert Hensley was a stubborn old fool holding back progress, walked the 2 miles from her house to Robert's front gate with a covered dish in her hands. She had not walked 2 miles in 15 years. Her hip was bad. She walked it anyway. Robert saw her coming from the porch. He got up. He walked down to the gate to meet her. Robert, she said. She was breathing hard. Her white hair was damp at the temples. Mrs. Colwell, I brought you a peach cobbler. She held out the dish with both hands. I know it doesn't fix anything. I know that. But I brought it anyway. Robert took the dish. It was still warm through the towel. I said things, Mrs. Colwell said. Her voice was shaking a little, and it was not from the walk. About you. I said things at the barbecue. I called you stubborn. I called you selfish. I said you were standing in the way of my grandson getting a job at the resort. I said it in front of 40 people. And I want you to know I said it. I don't want you to hear it from someone else and wonder if it's true. It's true. I said it. Robert looked at her for a long moment. He was quiet. Come up on the porch, Mrs. Colwell, he said gently. Sit down. You walked a long way. She followed him up. He brought her a glass of water from his own hand pump. She drank it slowly. She looked out at the fields. You knew, she said. The whole time. You knew. I knew what my daddy told me, ma'am. I didn't know what would come of it. I hoped. That was all. I owe you an apology. No, ma'am. Yes, I do. You brought a cobbler, Robert said. You walked 2 miles. Mrs. Colwell, that is an apology. You don't need to say the words. I heard them the moment you set down the dish. She began to cry. Quietly, without theater, the way old women cry when they have finally allowed themselves to feel something they have been holding at arm's length for weeks. Robert did not say anything. He sat with her. He let her cry. She was not the last one to come. Over the following week, others came too, in ones and twos, with pies and jars of preserves and small hesitant words. Not everyone. Some in the village would never come. Some were already gone. But the ones who came were the ones who had lived there longest, the ones whose grandparents had known Robert's father, the ones for whom the valley was not a real estate transaction, but a place where their families were buried, and Robert received each of them the same way. Without triumph, without accusation. He listened. He accepted their food. He walked them to the gate when they left. He was not a man who needed to be right out loud. Tyler drove up from the city on a Sunday afternoon, 3 weeks after the surveyors had first arrived. He had been reading about it in the papers. Not the big papers, but the regional ones. The ones that covered small stories about water rights and county commissions. His grandfather's name had appeared in one of them, spelled correctly. In a paragraph about a landmark lease agreement being finalized between a private landowner and the state water authority. Tyler had read the paragraph 3 times. Then he had gotten in his car. He found Robert on the porch. Same rocking chair. Same notebook on the small table. Same evening light lying long and yellow across the fields. Tyler climbed the steps and stood there with his hands in his pockets, the way he had stood the last time, and the way his father had stood before him, and the way generations of Hensley men had stood on that porch, trying to find the words for something too big for words. "Grandpa," Tyler said. "Sit down, son." Tyler sat. He looked at the fields. He looked at his grandfather. "I read about it," he said, "in the paper. I figured you might. You were going to let me read the notebook," Tyler said. "Only after you were gone." "That's what you said." "I did say that." "Why?" Robert was quiet for a moment. He rocked slowly. Then he said, "Because I did not know if it would come to anything, son. I did not know if the surveyors would ever come. My daddy did not know if they would come in his lifetime. His daddy did not know either. It was a thing we passed down, the watching. And I did not want to put that on your shoulders if it was not going to matter. I did not want you looking at this ground the way I looked at it every day, waiting for something that might never arrive." Tyler looked down at his hands. "I begged you to sell it, Grandpa, I know. I told you it was just dirt. I know, son, I'm sorry." Robert reached over. He put his hand on Tyler's shoulder. His grip was thin but strong, the way old men's hands sometimes are. "You are not sorry for the reason you think you are sorry," he said quietly. "You loved me. You wanted me to rest. You wanted me to not be hurt by the people who were hurting me. That is not a thing to apologize for. That is a good grandson." Tyler could not speak for a moment. "I want to tell you about the lease," Robert said gently, changing the ground under them the way he had a way of doing. "I want you to understand what it means, because it means something for you too, son. It means something for your children if you have them." Tyler looked up. "The land does not get sold," Robert said. "Not now. Not ever. That is written into the papers. It is leased to the state for 100 years, and then it can be renewed. The lease payments come every year. Not a great fortune, but steady. Enough, and when I am gone, the lease payments come to you. And when you are gone, to whoever you name after you. It is not money, son, not really. It is income. It is the kind of thing a family can lean against for a long time." Tyler stared at him. "I did not want to leave you a pile of money," Robert said. "Money runs out. Money gets spent on the wrong things, by the wrong people at the wrong time. Money is not a legacy, son. It is just a number. What I wanted to leave you was a stream. Something that keeps flowing, whether you are paying attention to it or not. The way the water keeps flowing under this ground, whether anyone is watching it or not. That is what I wanted to leave you." Tyler put his hand over his eyes for a moment. He did not want his grandfather to see. Robert saw anyway. He did not say anything about it. "Grandpa," Tyler said finally, his voice thick, "can I read the notebook now?" Robert smiled. He reached over to the small table. He picked up the worn green notebook. He placed it in his grandson's hands. "Yes, son," he said. "It is time." The communal tap was installed on a Thursday in early November, at the crossroads where the old church still stood, its doors newly unchained. It was a simple thing, a stainless steel spigot rising from a concrete pad with a small brass plaque bolted to the base. The plaque read, in plain letters, "Hensley Water Access. Free to all households. In perpetuity." There was no other name on it. Robert had insisted. The state sent a small ceremony team, but Robert had asked them to keep it quiet. No speeches, no ribbon, just the tap and the water and whoever wanted to come. They came, not all at once. In ones and twos, the way they had come to his porch with their cobblers and their preserves. Mrs. Colwell was there, leaning on her grandson's arm. The same grandson who was now going to have a job at the resort after all. Ellis Watson was there. He had brought a plastic jug. He filled it slowly from the tap, watching the water come out clear and cold and steady, and when it was full, he stood there with it heavy in his hand and did not immediately walk away. Robert stood a little apart, near the low stone wall by the church. He was wearing his good shirt, the one his wife had bought him for a wedding 12 years ago. Tyler stood beside him. Ellis walked over. He had not spoken directly to Robert in nearly 4 months. "Robert," he said. Ellis held up the jug. It caught the pale November light. "This is good water," he said. "Yes, it is. Been thirsty a long time in this valley." "Yes, we have." Ellis stood there a moment longer. He did not seem to know what else to say. His mouth worked once, then twice, and then he simply nodded and turned and walked back down the road with his jug of water, and Robert watched him go without any expression at all on his face, except a certain quiet that had been there for 30 years and would be there until the day he died. The resort broke ground in the spring. Scott Devlin came out to see Robert on the morning the first equipment arrived. He did not stay long. He shook Robert's hand at the gate and told him the project was proceeding on schedule, that the easement had been recorded properly, that the endowment payments were being made on the terms they had agreed to. He was not a warm man, and he was not going to become one. But something in the way he shook Robert's hand was different from the way he had shaken it the first time. He had learned something, and he knew he had learned it, and that was enough. Robert lived 4 more years, long enough to see the resort open, long enough to see the aquifer levels stabilize across 3 counties, long enough to see Tyler get married in the small church at the crossroads, which had been repaired with a portion of the endowment funds and had reopened its doors on a Sunday morning to a congregation of 32 people. Long enough to hold his first great-granddaughter, a small quiet baby with her great-grandmother's eyes, and to whisper something to her that no one else heard. He died in the fall, in his own bed, in the house his father had built, with Tyler holding his hand. The green notebook was on the nightstand. It had been read now, cover to cover, and understood. They buried him on his own land, in the northeast corner, beside his wife and his father and his father's father. The state had put that into the lease too. The graves stayed. They would always stay. Tyler still drives up on weekends. He walks the fence line sometimes with his daughter, who is old enough now to carry her own small notebook. He tells her what his grandfather told him. "Watch the water," he says. "That is all. Just watch the water." She writes it down. Sometimes the people the world calls fools are the ones who see furthest. Sometimes the ground everyone dismisses is the ground that will save them. And sometimes a legacy is not what a man leaves in the bank, but what he leaves flowing quietly under the feet of everyone who once mocked him. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below. And subscribe for more stories that remind us what really matters.